Today's episode, we have Marta, the founder of Connection Hub, which is an online community for those looking for more connection and community. Marta has been researching this topic of connection for such a long time, and she shares some amazing insights today. We talk about what is connection, what are some practical tools that anyone can use today that's going to allow you to feel more connection, and what's stopping people. What are some of the blockages keeping people from feeling connection. Really had an amazing conversation with her and excited to share it with you guys today. All right, let's dive into it. All right, let's jump into it. All right, welcome to the Connection Lab podcast, Marta. It's great having you on today. It's just, I want to just dive right into it. And, one question that I love to ask in the beginning for people is, at this stage in your life, I know it could change. Do you feel you have a sense of purpose? And what is that purpose?
Love that question. Thank you. Yes, I do. And it makes me happy to be able to say that because I feel that for the past few years, I have been meandering and trying to pinpoint what it is that I'm really talking about or really trying to do in the world. And at the moment, it seems to be community, connection, and communication. Somehow I can't pick just one word because they are so intertwined for me.
Yeah, totally.
Sometimes, yeah.
Was there a moment you found, what led you to this becoming something that's so deeply meaningful for you?
I guess my personal story, I believe that this is how things often happen for people. Like they end up doing something in their work that they were lacking, or a competence that they were missing, or something they were missing in their environment, some part of personal story. I see this at least among change makers, community that I am around. I feel like I've been quite an awkward person for a very long time, and I am still very often. But I guess now I have better tools to kind of overcome that awkwardness and social anxiety to some extent. Yeah. And in the past, maybe 7 or 8 years, before moving to Edinburgh in 2020, in the years leading up to that, I was moving around Europe quite a lot. So I was really tapping into a few different communities, environments, including my hometown, including like countryside setup, living setup, including a few other cities. And I think I never stayed anywhere long enough to be able to really put my roots in and bond with people. And at some point, it started really getting to me that I'm not, through that kind of lifestyle, I'm not meeting my fundamental need, which is really to be rooted in one place, maybe two places. I'm kind of exploring that at the moment. But long-term commitment to a community, to a place, to nurturing connections and relationships that become meaningful over time. They can also be meaningful in the moment, I suppose. But to me, there's certainly a distinction by now between a short-lived connection, which can be very beautiful and very nurturing and very precious, but that's different long-term relationship growth.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I do want to talk about that distinction between that connection. Before we get to that, what do you define as connection?
Oh my God, I should open one of my articles because I definitely wrote about it. And then I forget what I write. So I'm just going to try and answer from the moment, from where I stand just now. There's something about the heart openness to the other person. I believe connection is more of an in the moment experience than a relationship. To me, relationship is connected to time, is connected to some kind of a timeline usually. But connection can happen in the moment, no matter how long you know a person. So it's an experience. In my world, it's an experience that I have, and how I know that I have this experience is because I don't feel much hesitation. I don't feel much like withholding in myself of what to share, what to ask. I'm not really second guessing myself. So in a way, it feels like I am sharing a reality with the other person or people in that moment. And I guess it can happen on like more on a mental level sometimes. Intellectual connection, when we get into a really interesting conversation and we just get immersed in a topic and exploring it feels very exciting. It can also be more of a body connection, just like being really tuned in the body or emotional. But I think there's a fundamental piece about sharing a piece of reality that it just in that moment it feels like we are experiencing something that is very similar or connected. And of course I can't really check that because I don't know what the other person is experiencing, but there's that knowing of like, we get it in that moment, we get it.
like you feel in sync or like maybe understood. Do you think there's some kind of general core components that always happen in every connection? Maybe basically things that need to be present in order for that connection to happen. You know, maybe that's
Mm-hmm.
trust, safety, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think probably the most fundamental one will be safety slash nervous system regulation. I kind of
Mhm.
like that physiological term because somehow it feels very practical. So I like using it because it points me to what I actually can do, like self-regulate to be able to experience connection. But I guess without that, I don't see how connection is possible because if we don't feel safe
Mm,
with the other person and in ourselves, I guess our energy just goes into defending ourselves or putting on
yeah.
protections or like double, what's the word, like overthinking, second
Hmm.
guessing ourselves, some form of self-protection, which then there's
Yeah.
no energy and no openness for connection.
Yeah.
So it's like it's in the body experience. I think the body needs to be feeling in a certain way. And then I guess
Mm,
there are many components that will support connection, but I don't know that they are necessary always.
mm,
For example, good communication. For me, it's obvious that it supports connection when I'm able to communicate quite precisely what I'm experiencing and without blaming or projecting, but really owning my experience. Of course, that's going to support connection. Although, with some people who are not in that frame of mind, in that frame of communication, it might actually seem odd, and for
mm,
them, it might make them feel uncomfortable because they are not used to communicating in that way. So then it might actually block connection and make them
mm.
feel unsafe, for example.
So it sounds like one core that like seems like always needs to happen in any situation is the safety aspect. It's kind of like
Hmm.
a fundamental.
I'm also kind of thinking in my mind whether self-knowledge to some extent is necessary, but I don't
Mhm.
think it's necessary. I think it's a supportive condition. If I know more things about myself, I know how I'm responding, why I'm responding in that way, so I'm able to own
Mm,
my experience more in a connection with the other person. But I
mm,
think I've experienced many times when my self-knowledge was like suppressed by something or like I wasn't sober, for example. Definitely still experience
mm.
connection.
That makes sense. And
Mm.
I actually in one of your articles, I remember you mentioned with safety, there is physical safety that you can have, and then psychological safety. So what's like the distinction between those things?
Well, I guess for me, physical safety is just quite objective. It just
Mm,
means that nothing is threatening my physical survival in the moment.
mm,
Right now, I'm sitting in my room, I'm talking to you, I have a water, I have a cup of coffee, my belly's full, there's no war going on around me,
mm,
there's nothing that is immediately threatening me. But I could still have a response. For example, let's say you ask a question that is a bit triggering for me or is making me feel like, I don't know, like I shrink or something happens. Then
mm.
psychologically I can feel unsafe just because my
Yeah.
brain attaches that question or that thing that you said or that thing I projected that you said, um, yeah, attaches that to some kind of a threat that maybe in the past
Mm.
something happened that felt threatening as a child because a child cannot really distinguish between these two things. So I guess that's the distinction, like being able to kind of align the psychological safety with being physically safe. And of course, if many people in the world right now don't have physical safety as well, so I feel
Yeah.
it's a big privilege to be able to be talking about this topic because
Hmm.
I wouldn't be able to do it if I didn't have physical safety granted.
And I think, yeah, physical safety is something, yeah, like you said, it is kind of a luxury to have. I'm not really sure if that's something that people have as much control over. Do you think, do you think someone can actually like create physical safety? I mean, I want to touch on the same question with psychological, but do you think somebody actually can create that sense of physical safety? Is that something that can be, yeah, created?
Well, to me, I'm starting to think like systemically what needs to happen because I think everyone would
Mm,
want physical safety for themselves, and some people
mm,
are able to create it for themselves, like escape a country where there's war.
yeah.
Where,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
it is definitely possible, but it also shouldn't be like the individual
Yeah.
responsibility to do it if they're being threatened.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so like, yeah, this is like, to me, this question is opening a whole other topic with regard to connection, which is it's not just within our individual power to create
Hmm.
connection, because if we don't have like foundation
Yeah.
environment that is granting us that physical safety, and we don't know how to create it for ourselves, then
Yeah.
yeah, how do we experience that?
Totally. Yeah. I think if it's I like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think it's the more I look at it, that's pretty spot on. I think we need to have those the first part is healing, having shelter and food and that kind of stuff. So it's more like those physical needs. And then the next part is the connection. And yeah, we can't
Yeah.
really be worrying about connection if we don't have that survival safety first.
And then I guess it still happens when people are in a very big, like going through a disaster together, and like
Mm,
they need to
true.
kind of join forces to survive. I think that's also
True.
when connection happens, and quite a strong one.
Yeah, that's true. I haven't thought about that. How about then so just psychological safety. Let's say someone is in a country that or in a place that they feel safe. Is there anything people can do or work on in order to increase that sense of psychological safety so that they can be more vulnerable and more open to connection?
I know that, like, from the scientific point of view, psychological safety is mostly spoken about when it comes to groups, actually. So,
Hmm.
like, that's how that term evolved. I think in terms of one-on-one, psychological safety isn't mentioned so often. So my mind goes directly to groups and group culture when you ask that
Yeah.
question, and group norms that we can shape as humans, and especially if someone is taking on some kind of a leadership position. But I guess you don't need to have an explicit leadership position to change norms. Um, and by norms, I mean like spoken and unspoken rules of what is okay or not okay to do in a group.
Mm.
So like I say I'm imagining in corporate cultures, because I've not really been in the corporate world in my life very
Mhm.
much, apart from occasional
Yeah, good for
insights.
you.
I think quite lucky, but also a bit oblivious, because I know a
Mm.
lot of people are living that experience, and it's a
Yeah.
very valid experience, and it's a very common experience, and I don't fully understand it. So anyway, but for me personally, yeah, definitely, I feel lucky. So yeah, I imagine there's like not lots of permission for people to be vulnerable and share about their
Mm.
feelings and share that they are tired today and they would like to take it slow. So
Yeah.
in that sense, there will not be psychological safety in those cultures, because a person isn't doesn't feel free, doesn't feel safe to show up as who they are on that given day, because they
Hmm.
feel like they need to abide by some kind of a norm to always be on, to always be
Yeah.
proactive, to always be outgoing, and yeah, always in good shape. um
Hmm.
yeah, small things
Yeah.
like that. Even think about like super common pieces of culture. Like in the UK, I definitely noticed that when I moved here from Poland, which is my original country, the culture of asking how are you and just answering fine or not too bad, or
Hmm.
it's like it's just like a catchphrase that you ask,
Yeah.
but most people with asking it, they are not really expecting an answer. Sometimes they don't
Yeah.
expect an answer at all. Sometimes they expect to hear okay or fine, and if they
Yeah.
don't, that feels a bit
Yeah.
out of the script. So I guess even like widespread piece of culture like that can make us feel safer or less safe, in terms of
Oh, yeah.
psychological safety.
So yeah, I guess the context you're in or the environment you're in, a lot of the things are just out of our control. Yeah, and culture has a big influence on that. And how about let's touch on kind of two ways. One potentially for if someone is leading a group, whether that's in a company or facilitating an event, whatever it is. What are some things that that person can do as the leader or facilitator to create that sense of psychological safety so that people can be more vulnerable and open?
I think first is like making some kind of agreements, and sometimes it can be agreements with the group, actually asking people for what they need uh, to be present in the group today, to be participating. But sometimes
Mm.
even just there's not always time for that, I guess, or not always context for that to have like an open discussion with the group. But I think the leader or facilitator can make some things just explicit, just so people, for example, know that they are not required to participate if they don't want to, or they can
Mm.
ask questions, or they are free to leave the room whenever they want to, or that the facilitator has a co-facilitator who will be there available for any kind of emotional processing or any kind of needs that may
Mm.
arise throughout the event. yeah, just saying quite simple things really upfront is I guess one thing. And then I guess in terms of how the facilitator is showing up,
Mm,
like what's their way of being,
mm,
I have found in my groups, I think I still have a lot to learn as a facilitator in terms of like, skills and mental frameworks of what I'm doing. But what I know is my strength and what I know people are reflecting back to me as very useful in my facilitation is that I show up quite authentically and I can get quite vulnerable easily, but also without like performing my vulnerability, if that makes sense.
mm,
It's just like I often hear that I'm not a different person when I am in my facilitator's shoes or when I'm a friend, for example, because I have a lot of people come to my events who are also friends outside of that space. So I think that's one thing that makes people feel safe. Like if they see that the leader is allowing themselves to feel slightly awkward or saying that,
yeah.
"Oops, I made a mistake," or like, "Shit, I didn't think about this in advance. I'm sorry."
Hmm.
I think that's what makes people relax a lot
Yeah,
because
totally.
then it's
For
very
sure.
normalized.
So I guess, yeah, the
Yeah.
leader just kind of showing up like as a role model that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to make mistakes, setting some agreements, setting some rules that let people know that yeah, they can leave or anything else to feel safe. Do you think
Yeah.
there's just in your experience, I know you've hosted a lot of events, facilitated a lot of events. Is there any kind of exercises or games or anything that you found to be really, really powerful with getting people to, quickly feel that psychological safety?
I think it depends, a lot depends on the context and what kind of group I'm with. As for
Mm,
some people, a lot of vulnerability straight right off the bat will feel. I guess it's about tuning into the level of vulnerability that people are ready for. So like
mm,
inviting them into something a bit more vulnerable than what they are used to, but also not so big that they will get intimidated or scared. I think one thing that works really well, and I try to do it in all of my groups, even though it takes a bit of time, is just going around the circle and hearing each other's voices. And I thought
mm,
it's obvious to do this, but I realize not everyone does it in their workshops, especially if people have a big group. And I understand that if people have a big group, sometimes it's just
mm,
skipped altogether, or people just say their name. But I really love when people are invited to, with also explicitly being said that they don't have to, but they're invited to check in or say something about themselves. Just hearing everyone's voices helps. And I often have people say at the end of the group or an event that the first circle, the opening circle, felt really stressful for them. But then once they did it, once they kind of experienced themselves speaking in front of so many people, they were able to relax because it was like, oh, I've already done something that I never do anyway. It's been well
yeah.
received. It hasn't been
Mm,
a threatening experience for me. So
mm,
therefore, I was empowered to dive deeper. And I guess that's also an element of talking about psychological safety and safe spaces. I really like that framing that there is no such thing as a safe space. Ultimately, you can't guarantee that people will feel safe in
mm,
the space that you created, but you
mhm.
can do things to make a space safer. Or sometimes people talk about brave spaces. Maybe you run into this.
Don't know the term brave spaces, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's
Okay.
basically, yeah, just making sure that we are creating safer conditions for people
Hmm.
to feel brave
Right.
to say or do
Yeah.
something that they otherwise
Mhm.
wouldn't. So I guess psychological safety is a bit of a like a tricky thing because sometimes to feel safer, maybe first you need to do something or say something that feels a little bit edgy, and that is
Right.
actually, if it's held well, if it's received with compassion and understanding and care, then it makes people feel safer as a result.
So I guess like getting people to kind of test the waters a little bit before they dive fully in to kind of see where their kind of safety boundary is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, something like that. I think for a lot of people, it's quite hard to know where their boundaries are until they touch them or even cross them.
Yeah.
I
Right.
was in a consent
Right.
workshop recently that, and one person who's working with women work with a lot of sexual trauma quite often.
Hmm.
And she said, yeah, most people don't know where the boundaries are until they're crossed. And
Mm,
that kind of resonated quite a lot also with me personally. It's just that,
mm,
yeah, we're not really educated on these things as a society. So how would we
mm,
know? And she said that a lot of the time, as a result of consent workshops, first, people getting more awareness around consent, it seems like things are getting worse. Apparently, there are more incidents of boundary crossing. But that's not because it's actually getting worse. It's because people are starting to perceive how much they are getting their boundaries
Mm,
crossed and how much they are
mm,
not, you know, they are not expressing what is okay and what is not okay for them. Anyway, I'm kind of veering
gotcha.
towards that topic of consent because it's been quite alive in my life recently, but I don't know if this is necessarily where we're going.
I would love to touch on that. Yeah, I could definitely tell it's alive. And yeah, I think it's a big part of just communication and ultimate connection. But just actually a couple more questions just on the topic of psychological safety. I remember reading in some of your stuff that something that yeah really kind of clicked for me. You said, psychological safety can be, and if you have a group of friends or a tribe, and you have that kind of core group, and you're going out and meeting new people, and because you kind of have that kind of safety net, you're going to be more vulnerable and open to meeting these new people. Because worst case, you get rejected by them, you can go back to this kind of safety net. And I thought that was really just profound. I think it just makes total sense. And I think seeing in my own life, it's very true. When I'm with a close friend, if I'm going to an event or something, I'm just much more free. I feel much more safer. I'm more playful, all these things. And I think, yeah, I saw it so much in my life. And one question I was really curious of where my mind went to is, do you think it's, I think, yeah, that's like one way to do it is kind of having that kind of, tribe core group. Do you think there's other ways that a person individually can create that psychological safety, that feeling that they're safe and secure? And where my mind went was, I imagine the more healing work you do, more of the insecurities you heal in yourself. I think that potentially creates that kind of psychological safety because, if you get rejected by someone, you're okay because, yeah, you feel secure inside. But yeah, do you see that, or do you see ways that people can just by themselves increase that sense of psychological safety so they can feel more open?
So I'm just going to rephrase the question just in case because the internet, my connection has been a bit choppy. So just to make sure that I understood the
Okay.
question,
Yeah.
is it about what can we do kind of in ourselves and on our own to increase
Hmm.
our psychological safety, regardless
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
what other people are around us? Definitely. I feel like this has been part of my path before I settled in Edinburgh. Because as I said, I was kind of all over the place and I didn't rely as much on other people to help me find that safety. So I guess all sorts of um, mindfulness slash self-discovery techniques slash self-regulation techniques. Put it all in one bundle, which is not really fair, I think. I think at this point, I would say mostly self-regulation. So making sure that I have ways to make my body feel safe, just like breathing exercises, just like the meditation that you led for us in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. That really showed me like we shifted from first of all we had a threshold of like having just a landing chat together to then transitioning into the podcast. Like I felt that transition anyway, from like a
Hmm.
more casual part to the okay, this is the conversation that we intended to have.
Hmm.
Yeah, so things like that.
And with that, with self-regulation, do you
Some things
have
about
sorry, I was just gonna ask, for the self-regulation part, do you kind of have a go-to thing you do or a go-to kind of exercise you do that helps you calm down? Any kind of tool you can share for the
recently it's been
audience?
dancing.
That's it. Nice.
Recently it's been dancing. Yeah. I think it changes, it shifts. I used to do a lot of mindfulness meditation and did several courses. And yeah, I spent a lot of time meditating at some point in my life. Now, I don't know, I just don't feel that much of a connection to that practice, even though I still do it sometimes. But I guess that maybe there's also a difference with dancing because it also brings a lot of energy. For me, it generates positive emotions as well. So
Mm.
rather than just tuning the emotions down, they actually amplify positive emotions. If I have my favorite song dancing to, so I guess that's one. Another one that I really like is it's called Jacobson's technique. It's
Hmm.
about tensing and releasing your muscle tension. Just like with an in breath, you tense up different parts of your body. First
Mm.
feet, then calves, then whole legs,
Yeah.
and then with the
Hmm. Yeah, I do it when I go to sleep sometimes.
how does it work for you?
Great. Yeah, I feel like my body relaxed, can more into the bed by just relaxing each body part.
Yeah. Yeah, I found it quite powerful. Like for a 10-minute practice, it can shift quite a lot
Hmm.
in my
Cool.
body. So yeah, I guess I mean, self-regulation techniques is like there's a whole host of these things that anyone can find, I suppose. So maybe I won't talk too much about that because this is just my
Hmm.
personal preference. I'm just trying to think what else in terms of, oh, I know, ritual. That's another thing that is quite powerful. There's actually quite good research on rituals and how they are innate part of being human. There's
Mm.
this interesting hypothesis that it's not that we had religions first and then designed rituals around them, like physical actions of like, leaving an offering or something like that. It's that we were doing ritualistic actions more as like a physiological thing with our bodies to calm down our systems, just like a repetitive movement, for example. It's
Mm.
because this is something that we instinctually do as human beings, and then from those ritualistic, very simple behaviors, I don't know, for some reason I'm just doing that. But it would be like making a cross, for example. It would just come instinctually, and then we would, as humans, create a religion or like system of beliefs around that. Anyway, that's just one theory. But I
Mm.
found it quite fascinating because it shows me that there is innate power in rituals. It's just, I guess,
Mm.
people often think about them as like some kind of magic and like a wishy-washy thing that is not
Hmm.
very real. It's like a placebo, and
Hmm.
in a way it is a placebo, but it's like our body knowing how to regulate itself, actually. And I
Yeah.
think now, because we're conscious human beings and like our brains have evolved significantly and we can think in very abstract ways, we can even more amplify the power of rituals because we can consciously attach meanings to different things. Like, for example, I have a candle burning right now next to me, even though it's the middle of the day. But I thought, oh,
Hmm.
candle, the act of lighting a candle, for me, there's something grounding about it. There's something bringing energy to our conversations. It's like there's inspiration there for me, like a small flame
Yeah.
burning over there.
I think that, yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I think, and that's, I guess that's a personal preference for each person. But finding kind of that ritual that kind of grounds you or anchors you back into that kind of that feeling that you want for the situation.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah, that makes a
exactly.
lot of sense.
It's bringing intention into it as well, just like you did with the opening meditation. And then
Hmm.
also it goes into another type of ritual, so to speak, which is collective ritual, which is another way of people connecting together, which is also something that I'm really interested in. And especially since I live in Edinburgh and in the Salisbury Centre, which is a center for spiritual, psychological, and creative well-being. But the spiritual
Hmm.
aspect is quite like profound and quite pronounced. But also, it's not about one specific faith. It's for people of all faiths. So I feel like as a community, we have developed our own set of ceremonies, rituals, and things we do as a community to connect kind of beyond
Hmm.
words. Of course, words are also exchanged in these events and in these ceremonies, but it feels like there's more to it in terms of connection.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of having those set rituals that kind of makes the group feel like more like a group, right? And more just like unique that we have this these things that we do together and that kind of community belonging when it's like a recurring thing.
Yeah, it's like a sense of identity that it gives us.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's that element of regulation because
Hmm.
it's predictable. One of the most essential parts of a ritual is that you know what's going to happen,
Mm.
or
Yeah.
even if you don't know everything in advance, there is some kind of a master of ceremony who's going to tell you. So we had a
All right.
ritual last week, was it last week for Beltane, for like this the opening of spring, where we did very simple actions like be around the fire and then put some intentions in the fire, and then we received every person received a piece of string, and then we had a little procession around the garden to kind of be with our intentions for the spring and what kind of seeds we are sowing. And then we put those strings on one of the trees in the garden. And the facilitators told us that they were going to stay there until I think either the summer solstice or the next festival. There's like a whole wheel of Celtic festivals here,
Mhm.
which is like a harvest. No, I think it's the harvest festival in August, Lunasa. So this is when we're going to take those strings and kind of harvest what seeds we sowed. I never know. In the
Sound, I think.
spring. Anyway, sown. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. And yeah, I think that's yeah, kind of gives that community feel, right, and that identity that you're all doing this the same thing together. Yeah, really interesting
Hmm.
topic of I think yeah, just going back to the topic of psychological safety. Yeah, I think it's really interesting for people to just think about. I think it is the more I think about it, just how apparent it is that this is so important to feel that connection because you can't really open up to someone, be vulnerable if you're not feeling that psychological safety. And there's different ways
Mm.
that anyone can do that and bring it to their everyday life. I think yeah, dancing is a good one. I think a lot of people can resonate with. I used to meditate a lot. I still do meditate a lot, but I've been more and more using dancing as a way to kind of regulate myself, get myself ready before going to some event and just getting my energy in a good place. Cool.
It's powerful.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's yeah, so simple and something that anyone can do. I do want to touch back on before we talked about the distinction between connection and belonging. You mentioned that connection can happen, you don't need to know the person for a long time. It can happen because it's an experience that can happen just by, when you're talking to someone. So what's the difference between connection and belonging or a deeper friendship?
First, most obvious one is time. I think, as I
Hmm.
said before, connection doesn't really require time. Sometimes
Hmm.
it feels like it just requires a certain compatibility or something just clicks, the
Hmm.
circumstances are right, and it just happens. Whereas belonging in a relationship is something that you nurture over time, and it's not always easy. Probably that's
Hmm.
one thing. The concept of conflict comes in straight away for me. It's like
Hmm.
belonging in relationships are like real ones, the ones that we're really here for.
Hmm.
They get created in the process of um, going through obstacles together and going through difficult moments and doing it in such a way that we emerge on the other side stronger. Our relationship transformed, our sense of belonging deeper, and that's
Hmm.
precisely because we managed to be together for something difficult, either as just a one-on-one relationship or as a
Hmm.
group or as a community. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, difference between connection and belonging slash relationship.
I definitely agree with you said of conflict. Anytime I've noticed when I go through conflict with a friend or partner, when we work on it together, have the open communication, we end up being just way more connected, and having that whatever it is, just go deeper. I wonder why do you think that is? Why do you think that going through conflict just increases that relationship or connection?
Oh, I think it's first of all, just to be clear, it's going through conflict in a specific way. Well, maybe not one specific way, but not going through conflict by sweeping things under the rug and just shouting at each other until we have no more energy.
Hmm.
I don't believe that this kind of conflict necessarily strengthens relationships. Yeah, but the kind of conflict where I guess we build a bit more mutual understanding, so we're
Hmm.
able to hear each other out. If not straight away, then maybe in hindsight, like when the emotions are have subsided a little bit. Yeah, there's some for sure. There is like personal transformation attached to conflict for me because if we open up, there's this book by Jason Diggs, Conflict Equals Energy. I really
Okay.
recommend this book. It's a book on authentic relating, actually, but with that angle on conflict and yeah, different energies meeting. And I think in this book he speaks a lot to that kind of concept of polarity. Like in a conflict, essentially, one person holds one perspective and the other person holds another perspective, and because of that, they
Hmm.
clash. But they are able to open themselves a little bit to the other person's perspective. They learn and they transform. And to
Hmm.
me, that happens so many times, especially at the Salisbury Center, because I live here within a wider community, but also in a smaller community of residents. We need to collaborate on certain things. We also come from quite different backgrounds with some of the people that I live with. So yeah, I think it taught me humility. I'm definitely like I said to you in the email, I consider myself quite a conflict avoidant person and definitely not an expert on doing conflict. Like I've
Hmm.
avoided conflict all my life, most of my life. But I know that each time I allow myself to go there and like just stay long enough to be like, okay, it's not just about me. It's not just about me being right. there's probably something for me to learn here, then eventually I learn. So I think it's that mutual learning, really. Learning about myself in that conflict, learning about the other person, just like having a broader perspective on life, ultimately.
Hmm. Yeah. I think, yeah, one
Yeah.
thing I'm hearing or just potentially understanding is yeah, when you have conflict, one, you're understanding the other person and having like a deeper understanding because usually the conflict comes because you're not you're assuming a lot of things about the other person of how they're thinking, which isn't true. So you're kind of having that deeper understanding about them. And then you're coming together with new learnings and perspectives that you're like kind of co-creating, which kind of creates that yeah, like a deeper bond, right? When you're learning things
Mhm.
with each other.
And I guess, oh wait, I had the thought, but maybe it slipped my mind. No, I think there's also something about if you resolve conflict is often because you realize there's something that you have in common or you're working towards a common goal. And I think that's
Mm.
like quite a well-known concept in conflict resolution, as far as I'm aware, that a lot of the time it's mediators, for example, start with trying to establish some kind of a common ground, a shared
Mm.
sense of purpose. So people
Yeah,
remember that actually we are working towards the same thing. And I
yeah,
think going through conflict successfully or healthily or with an open heart helps to um, kind of what's the word? Stabilize that knowing that we are actually
totally.
not that
Uh,
different and working towards
yeah,
something similar. Yeah.
yeah. I think especially in like friendships, when two people come together to resolve the conflict, either they're basically both agreeing that we care about the relationship and we want to solve it. So we're on the same side.
Yeah, beautifully said. Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for saying it like that.
So it
Yeah.
kind of like, yeah, reinforces that. So yeah, I think that's really important. I guess that's a big thing I would imagine with bonding and belonging is you can have a connection one day, but you don't really know if that person is kind of committed to building a friendship with you or building with something. But if you have a friendship and you're growing, what the more you know that that person really cares about the friendship and is kind of looking at it more long term, or I don't know if it needs to be long term, but they want it to work. I think that is something that creates that sense of belonging.
I guess care is also in it. I care about you, you care about me, I care about the relationship. So it
Mhm.
means something in my life. I prefer to have it rather than not have it in my life.
Yeah.
Something around that. I'm also learning recently that there are also different levels of this almost. I'm still learning how to navigate it because I've never had so many friends in my life and friends of different proximity, because I'm in this community setting, I meet a lot of people. I run an authentic relation group where it's very easy to make very deep connections in a very short amount of time. But then it's the question
Mhm.
of like, will I follow through? Will I take this forward? Do I have space for one more meaningful relationship in my life rather than just a momentary connection? And just the other day, I was talking with a friend. We were actually like emerging from like a mild conflict, misunderstanding, and she was voicing. Actually, she is questioning like how much should she put into our connection, into our relationship, and whether it means the same
Mhm.
thing for both of us.
Yeah.
And I'm still kind of left with that question because I realize there are definitely a few people in my circle that I can name as like this is my close friend. I'm going to
Mhm.
care about this person and I'm going to find time for them if they need me and I'm going to prioritize them. But there's only so many people like that you can have. And
Yeah.
then beyond that, there can still be people that you care about, but you can't drop everything for them, for example, because you only have so much resources, so much time, so much energy. So there's a very interesting and sometimes tricky question about prioritizing relationships, especially if you are in the wider group of people. And I feel quite fortunate to have this problem, obviously. It's not
Yeah.
really a problem. It's more like how do I navigate this?
Mhm.
Um, because I realize a lot of people don't have that. They don't have more friendship opportunities that they can handle. So I'm just
Mhm.
realizing, well, I've also never been in this position in my life, and I'm learning how to find a difference between a close friend, a community
Mhm.
member, and an acquaintance. Let's say, just to put some labels on, like how do you
Yeah.
know who's who?
That's really interesting. I think it seems like kind of like a spectrum, right? Of like the community member is someone that you're gonna obviously put some time towards, but obviously not prioritize over, best friend. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, prior how much you're maybe willing to sacrifice. I don't know if sacrifice is the right word, but how much you're willing to maybe sacrifice or prioritize, that kind of clarifies the relationship a lot,
Yeah.
who that person is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, so kind of just I've been thinking a lot about the whole belonging thing and friendship thing. One of the goals of the events that we're running for Connection Lab is not only to get people to feel connection at the event, which is still amazing, it's a beautiful thing and it's very healthy, it has all these benefits, but having people to extend that connection afterwards to actually build something and to ultimately feel that deeper sense of belonging. Because we mentioned it takes time, but do you see like kind of certain steps, or have you noticed any kind of like common steps that happen that churn that connection into this like deeper sense of belonging? Or like what
Mhm.
needs to happen between people for that transition to happen?
So interesting that you raised this question, because this is literally the question that we've had with the other facilitator after last event that we were doing. It was like a one-off authentic relating
Mm,
event, and he raised that question specifically. How much it is possible and necessary to give people those options to like continue after? And I think it's a very different question for like a one-off event, and it's a very
mm,
different question for an ongoing group. And I suppose I have more experience with the latter, actually, in terms of community groups running something that is running for like a few years or even a few months, every second week or every week. So that's
mm,
obviously easier to take those connections outside of that container, because people will
yeah.
meet again. They have
Hmm.
a chance for deepening. Usually at the end of the event, there's some social time. I guess that's like one of the most obvious things that you can build in after the formal program of the event has finished, not kicking people out of the room straight away, but allowing that contingency, like this time for people to just
Yeah.
mingle and finish conversations that started in the workshop or the event, things like that. Also with dating events, like that's very specific kind of event, but then because people come specifically to meet somebody that they would be hopefully seeing
Hmm.
outside of that container, there's like a nice way you can set up, the exchange of contacts. The way I've done it was that people get a note, a piece of paper out after each interaction, and I tell them you can either share your contact details or you can just say a thank you note, and they just exchange pieces of paper without checking
Hmm.
them straight away. So there's not
Okay.
that pressure of you have to give your phone number. You can, but the
Hmm.
other person will not know straight away. They will look at their
Yeah.
notes at the end of the event, things like that. It's also just an interesting question of like how important it is to do that, because as we said in the beginning, and you also kind of flagged that up now, the connection is valuable in itself. Even that
Hmm.
momentary connection is valuable. However, I'm sometimes wondering in these connection events, like how does it leave some people, and especially those who might be really thirsty for that for deep connection and don't have it in their daily life? How does it
Hmm.
feel to be so deeply held and understood in an event, and then you go home and then you never see that person again? So I'm almost
Hmm.
thinking like, is it well, moral responsibility? I think it's too much said of a facilitator, but I feel it's definitely some like piece to keep in mind in terms of like ethics of doing these things. Just like accounting
Hmm.
for people go really deep in these experiences sometimes,
Oh, yeah.
and some people go deeper than they are prepared to go, or they were expecting themselves to go, and then they might go back home and get no support. So I don't
Yeah.
necessarily have like a prescription here. I guess this is something that we are maybe just discovering together. I wonder if
Yeah.
you have any experience with this also, like or thoughts on this, because I'm
Well, yeah, it
also
is definitely something I am diving into. So, after all of our events, we're surveying all our people to see who actually ends up hanging out with other people and trying to find out what led to them actually asking the other person. We're still getting, we just started doing the surveys like a week ago, so we're still getting data, or just like information. So far, it seems like, yeah, so when somebody notices that the other person has shared values, is a big thing. Once they're able to see in the connection event that it's clear to them that the other person has shared values, that's something that triggers them to, yeah, want to actually hang out more. Some other theories is, I think if there's some similar interest, some kind of similar thing that, you can continuously kind of build on and talk about, like if you're both, I don't know, really into yoga, that's something you can do together. Or if you're both into, I don't know, playing music, that's something you could do together. So some type of kind of thread of something that is instead of just randomly just meeting up for coffee. I think if there's some activity that you both enjoy doing, that's a place where once that's known, because I think in a lot of times you might go to an event and the person sitting next to you, maybe you actually had a lot of things in common. You just never got to it. Um, that's kind of more of a theory that we're still trying to figure out. So yeah, we are trying to think of kind of that, I guess, prescription of what is it that what would actually make it so that this person actually wants to hang out with the other person, and trying to like make that known, whether that's in the event or after the event. Because maybe you're at an event and you talked about some deep stuff, but you didn't actually talk about some other stuff that you knew you actually could have connected on and would have wanted to hang out because of that.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Hmm.
it's definitely something where that's like the problem, one big problem we're trying to solve. With
Hmm.
that's what we're trying to offer with their events.
Yes, something you said about like communicating it either before or during or after the event. I think that
Mhm.
might be like one of just setting an expectation around this might be helpful for people, so that people
Mhm.
know that they are coming to an event to meet potentially new friends, or vice
Yeah.
versa. Like this event doesn't promise that, and people just want to come for an experience, do some kind of like an inner explorations, be connected, but they are not actually interested in finding new friends. I guess you can never predict if you are or if you aren't. It depends who you meet in the container. But I
Hmm.
guess some of events offer that more explicitly, like a dating event, for example. Obviously, people
Yeah.
come with that kind of openness.
Yeah.
They have space for a new person in their life. So yeah, just
Right.
communicating that before the event seemed like maybe a helpful thing.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Of kind of setting the expectation and maybe giving a little bit of guidance on like if you are here to make friends, here are some things you can keep in mind or look for. Maybe be a little clear on your values. What are you looking for in friendships, or what are those similar interests or things you would want that other friend to have in common, so that people are kind of
Hmm.
screening in a way of who has those
Hmm.
things. That's interesting. But yeah, so yeah, this is going to be kind of an ongoing thing. Because yeah, for us, it's kind of a big the goal of the Connection Lab event is to get people to walk away with actual friendships and to be able to build
Yeah,
on that.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I guess there's also another like thing that people can take out of the event and into their life, which is not necessarily a new relationship, but also bringing connection skills to the relationships that they already have.
yeah,
So for me,
totally.
that has been a big question in the authentic connection group. It's like, yeah, we just sat with that question a lot of the time and like just wondered how to it can be quite easy to ask certain types of questions or set boundaries or offer a reflection with a person that you don't really know when the rules of the game are explicitly inviting that in an authentic relating
Right.
game context, for example. But I think it's a very different thing to do it with your sister or with your parents or
Yeah,
with your friend or with your colleague. So
yeah,
I'm also
who
curious
who
about
aren't
that.
used to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
How's your experience been with trying to bring that kind of authentic communication with people who aren't used to it, maybe like family members? Yeah, how's
Yeah.
your general experience been?
Family members is a very interesting one because I definitely have tried and I went through different phases of trying harder and trying less. I remember one kind of a successful example was when we were going for a family holiday and I invited like a check-in and intention setting Zoom call for all of us. So it was my parents, myself, and my partner at the time, and my brother and his partner. So it was six of us tuning in from different countries on Zoom, and I facilitated some very simple check-in and then everyone just talking about their expectations for the holidays. And I could see it was very new for my parents. It was like, yeah, they couldn't quite orient themselves. But I think especially
Mhm.
for my mom, it was quite useful actually. And like a few things came out kind of on the sides of it, like what kind of permission we are giving to each other, like what are we expecting of each other as well. It wasn't super explicitly invited, the invitation, I guess,
Mm.
was more about like how would you like to spend time, what kind of activities you would want to do. But on the side, there was like a conversation going on around like, oh, well, do you expect other people to cook for you? I don't know, just some more group dynamic stuff that
Mm.
kind of came to the surface, just came to consciousness because of that simple container. I love the word container, by the way. It's just the creating
Hmm.
container is just all of these things, these facilitation tools, the games and everything. Container is the underlying concept for all of them, I think. Like there's a beginning, there's an end, there is something that happens inside
Mm.
that is clearly defined, or at least to some extent defined. Like
Hmm.
that in itself, I think invites a lot of safety, a lot of
Yeah.
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 But
That's,
coming back to like yeah, friends, family members, I think like the other side of it is also Sarah Ness has a really good article. It's called something like "How to Do Authentic Relating with Your Dad" or something like that. It's on
okay.
Authentic Revolution website. I read it a long time ago, so I can't remember the whole thing. But basically, the gist of it that I do remember, and I started practicing with for example, with my family, is also not to expect that people will meet me in my communication
Mm.
preferences. It's
Yeah.
actually coming more from the standpoint of, okay, I've done some work around this. I educated myself to be able to meet other people where they are at and not to expect that they will meet me where I'm at. So that I
Hmm.
guess has been big with family as well. Just like not forcing super open-hearted conversations with my dad if he's definitely not in the mood for it, because actually we connect better over discussing I don't know, social issues, which is not
Hmm.
maybe in the realms of a connection game, but this is where we find aliveness. This is where we get excited. So also
Yeah.
following things that are already there, not forcing connection in a way that
Yeah.
the authentic relating games tell you to do, but just following what's already there and building on that.
Yeah. Kind of like meeting people where they're at, right? And not just trying to force. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
And also
sense.
not looking at like not coming from a place of superiority, because I think that's
Mm.
also a trap for anyone who spends some time in the self-development world. I think
Hmm.
probably everyone goes through that phase of like, I've learned these things and now I see other people are so oblivious and so unconscious and I'm better than them. Of course, we wouldn't
Hmm.
say it like that, but I think
Yeah.
it is just a natural phase of doing some work on yourself, but then kind of
Hmm.
going beyond that. And so I'm not meeting my dad, or at least I'm trying to not to come from that frame of mind of like, oh, I'm going to go down to your level now, but more from the frame of mind of like, just everyone just has their own ways and their own backgrounds and their own paths, and that's where they're at, and it's not better or worse, it's just different. So trying to nurture that. I guess that's
Yeah.
the more subtle side of connection and relationships. So not just the out, not just what you project outwardly in terms of what you say, how you are with other people, but just the kind of attitude that you bring. It's like, to me, it's almost like a more spiritual element. What
Mm.
qualities am I nurturing in myself? How am I showing up quietly? Not talking about it, but just quietly.
Are there any like recurring kind of attitudes or intentions that you bring into just I guess everyday connections, everyday situations that lead to more connection in your life?
I try. It's not always ideal. Um, I guess intentions around appreciation and what
Mm.
is called a positive regard towards other people. So really
Yeah.
just trying to keep that awareness that no one is doing harm willingly on purpose because that's the best way that they see. But if anyone does harm, it's either because they have unresolved needs or it's just me perceiving it as harm. It's not necessarily them doing harm. Or they're just unaware of something and it's like it's actually very innocent. They just haven't considered something. And also remembering that I do the same things or very similar things. So just trying
Yeah.
to see people in their kind of divinity, really. It's a big word, but
Hmm.
it's somehow it is on my mind. Yeah, just seeing their good nature like underneath all of that. And I don't think everyone agrees with this paradigm of like all people are good unless they have been broken or deprived in some ways. But I guess this is my fundamental belief actually, that
Hmm.
if people had resources throughout their life and didn't have trauma and all these roadblocks, people would just
Hmm.
treat each other with care and love, because that's the best way we have. And also this is who we are as mammals.
Hmm.
There's this whole side of evolutionary science, yeah, about like how we actually need to have those qualities to survive as a mammalian species.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely do believe in that. And I think regardless of whether or not you or someone agrees with that everyone, has this kind of positive attention, I think it's clear that when you do have that, you're coming from that place of positive regard where you're kind of seeing the good in the other person, knowing that you're kind of on the same side. You're just going to be more open to them, and that openness is going to create more possibility for connection. So whether or not you believe in it, by doing it and having that practice, you will be more open to connection. And do you think there's anything people can do? Let's say anyone is listening today. Is there anything they can do, or maybe any practice that they can do that can just like kind of increase that sense that a positive regard with other people that's just going to allow them to feel more open?
I think practicing self-compassion is probably the place to
Mm,
start. At least for me, like it's very clear now that I can only have compassion for others if I have compassion for myself. It's so clear. For me,
yeah.
one practice for self-compassion has been mirror meditation. It
Mm.
was like a very deep and supportive practice in my life at some point.
Is that like
Yeah,
a eye gazing with yourself?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, you can do some more active, intentional things as well, like putting hand on your heart and touching yourself to induce that sense of self-soothing even more, because then you see it. But it's about, yeah, you see yourself in the mirror as like you just externalize yourself. So it's much easier to notice your inner critic, for example, because if you don't see
Mm,
the person that the inner critic is impacting, kind of it remains invisible. But if there's critical talk going on in your mind, and at the same time you're looking at yourself in the mirror, your face will probably reflect that criticism because you will suffer
mm,
in
mm,
the same way as if someone else was criticizing you. So that's kind of the explanation, the psychological explanation. But
mm,
beyond just explaining it mentally, I think it's just quite a beautiful and curious experience.
mm,
Yeah, self-compassion, I think, is a big one. And I'm
mm,
sure you can just do practices with people in your life. I'm saying I'm sure. Maybe not everyone can, but like sharing appreciation with someone, even if it feels a bit forced, at first, because I think it's sometimes forced because we're just not used to doing it. But like establishing that positive rapport before you talk about something difficult, for example, that has worked for me many times. We've had like house check-ins here at the Salisbury Center for, yeah, ever since I moved in. And we always started with gratitudes and appreciations. So like sometimes we knew that there is something in the air that we need to talk about. But first we were just like, okay, what can we honestly appreciate about each other, about our lives at the moment? And sometimes it wasn't that much. Sometimes it came
mm,
harder. But I think it always shifted something for me, even if very subtly, to like, oh, there's not just negative things, there's also positive things. And kind of from there, it's much easier to start talking about something challenging.
mm.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
kind of meandering. I forgot your original question, but I think I'm still mostly on point.
Yeah. Yeah. Of just how to kind of come, bring that kind of intention or frame of positive regard. How can someone like bring that on a daily basis so they feel more
Yeah.
open? I think,
Yeah.
like you said, by sharing appreciation or making that as a practice, you're kind of forcing yourself to see the good in people and just, yeah, just see the good, which is going to allow you to just trust them more and be, more pulled. And yeah, you mentioned self-compassion. For me, that's definitely been so true. I think the more compassionate and loving I am to myself, the more, loving and kind of space I have for love for other people. And one kind of habit I've kind of installed, I've kind of taken this in one approach of I don't know if you're familiar with atomic habits, but I've kind of basically I'm installing, or at least currently I'm attempting to install this as a habit where basically anytime I feel like I'm judged by someone, now I automatically have this habit where as soon as I feel judged, I'm basically first sending love to the other person. And I do that by mentally just in my mind, like giving the other person a hug or like a kiss on the forehead. And then I send love to myself because I find that every time that I'm judging someone else, I find it's because there's some either insecurity I have of myself or some type of like defensiveness. Almost every time I do that, I do notice that it is like a defensiveness. So when I send love to myself, it's been pretty remarkable change for me. I've just been almost immediately just more open to the other person. And yeah, it's been just such a great practice for me. It's kind of just like as a habit, anytime I catch myself judging somebody, I just send them love and myself love. And it kind of clears away a lot of that friction that I'm feeling towards the other person.
So it sounds like you really established it as a habit, not just a nice idea, but you actually practice it.
Yeah. It's currently happening automatically, which is
Uh-huh.
yeah, I do this like habits
Nice.
mastermind with my friend, and yeah, we're kind of doing like one habit at a time and like only moving on once that habit kind of becomes automatic. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's been really cool because a lot of times I do all these things that are, great and I do it once and then kind of forget about it. Um, but by yeah, kind of having this kind of recurring mastermind with my friend, we kind of do it like right brick. It's been
That's
yeah, it's been great.
amazing. Yeah, that sounds really helpful and really inspiring as well. What other habits have you installed?
Well, one similar to that is anytime I feel like somebody is judging me, so that's like the cue, then I immediately just send myself love, and then I send the other person love. And immediately, like it's been crazy. Like immediately I just feel one, I just feel like the other person actually isn't judging me. I feel more open towards them. And then I'm like usually the thought that goes in my mind is like, oh my God, I just assumed this guy was judging me when I literally have no idea if he was actually judging me. So kind of that defensiveness is just like removed once I'm just sending
Mhm.
myself love
Mhm.
from that judgment.
Mhm.
But yeah, just some like other stuff is like just with morning practices, morning routines, keeping my phone away as much as I can, exercise, diet kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been really interesting. Like in the past, I saw habits more of as a way, it's great for like sleep routines or exercise. But now I'm realizing like it can literally be for like anything. Any basically thought we have is typically habitual. And if you can create that clear cue, you can create the response. And if you kind of use the formula in Atomic Habits works really well. So I realize, yeah, it can be applied to basically almost anything.
Yeah, it can be applied to relationships and connection equally.
Totally. Yeah, especially in
Uh,
like conflict, right? Conflict can be a cue. If you're one of my friend that I'm doing the habits mastermind with, and I think this would touch in with kind of the conflict resolution part that you were talking about is anytime he catches himself, sometimes his daughter is crying, and his normally his first response is to try to solve it, or if it's like or his wife is saying something that his first step is to try to solve it. But now he's using that as a cue to come into what he calls more of his right brain and more as like empathetic side and just like validating the other person of the emotion. And yeah, he's been doing that just for a month, and he said it completely transformed his relationship with his wife, with his kid, and now his wife is actually modeling it off of him. So now anytime he has a problem, instead of her trying to like solve it, she's just coming in and like first validating the emotion, and then after that they maybe figure out a solution. But
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Like this will be my big takeaway from this conversation, I think. Like relational habits, the way
mm,
we habitually respond to people or to specific situations in
mm.
relation to others, and that we can actually intentionally change that.
And yeah, I think the great thing about habits is if you can make it into a way that happens, ideally eventually automatic, that's great. Because otherwise you're kind of relying each time that you kind of remember and you're willfully, because you probably know the things you should be doing, right? Like when it comes to conflict, or at least to some sense. But I think we're habitually, or a lot of people can be habitually trained to not do that. And maybe they're habitually trained to get angry and to
Mhm.
lash out or whatever that is.
Well, I
So,
guess that's the whole idea of atomic habits, right? That you focus on a small enough thing that you can over
mhm.
time really rewire it into something equally automatic that you don't put effort into, but
Yep.
it's
Yeah.
kind of spread, like ripples out. Um,
Hmm.
yeah,
Cool.
nice.
Well, going back to yeah, just overall overarching topics of connection. I think we talked a lot about what creates connection. What are some of the things people can do to create connection? What are some of the things that you see that really kills connection or really blocks people from having connection?
Distraction,
Mm.
phones. I mean, you just mentioned keeping your phone away. This is something that it's obvious. So I feel, yeah, maybe it's a bit redundant saying this, but at the same time, it needs to be said again. Um, yeah, I feel like there needs to be this experience of dropping in into being present with each other to stay in connection. But a lot of the
Yeah.
time, in everyday situation, the phone is just on the table. And as I'm sure you know, as a habit researcher and habit practitioner, even seeing the phone on the table
Yeah.
takes away a part of our attention from that connection. And I definitely notice it in myself. This is something that I'm actually now recognizing. I'm in my kind of like a more like a down in terms of my relationship with my phone because it used to be, it fluctuates, I suppose. But at least I think I'm pretty good at keeping the phone away when I am with somebody, like not checking the
Mm.
phone, ideally keeping it hidden from sight.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess
Yeah.
this distraction
Yeah.
thing.
That's yeah, so true. I think especially younger generations have I think especially have are having harder time connection and with connection I think yeah, distraction is a big part of it, right? They're
Yeah.
habitually kind of wired to their phones.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's for like many other things, not just connection, but like deep work. If you want to do
Yeah.
meaningful work, it's so hard to do it if your attention goes out of it every few minutes, because then
Mm.
obviously there is a cost of switching that attention. But yeah, in
Yeah.
terms of connection, I think one other thing is having an agenda for what needs to happen in a conversation, in a relationship, which is,
Mm.
I guess that's the tricky part to avoid when you are in a long-term relationship or friendship. I think partnerships are probably the clearest example of this, like romantic partnerships, because I think for most people it's very hard to be in a romantic partnership with no expectations. Because essentially people enter those partnerships because they want a specific type of relationship, a specific type of support. So that's hard, because I think on the one hand it's very justifiable that you have those expectations, and it's normal and probably healthy in many contexts. Like you have some relationship agreement, you are with each other for a
Mm.
reason. But at the same time, I think sometimes if the conversation doesn't go exactly the way you want to, or your partner, I'm talking about partners, but it can be with anyone, the other person doesn't respond in the way that you would have wanted to, or you want to talk about a
Mm.
specific topic, but actually there's something more important to talk about, and you can't quite let go of that expectation of like, I need to talk about this now. I guess
Mm.
that's like, you can troubleshoot for that in many ways. Like this is where I'm never quite sure how much to be structuring my everyday conversations sometimes, because I have some people around me who appreciate it. Setting an expectation for a conversation, for example, I think it can be a
Mm.
double-edged sword when it comes to creating more or less connection. I have a friend and a collaborator with whom we very often meet, and we start with like, okay, how much time do you have? What would we want to cover? How much time would we spend talking about work? How much time would we spend connecting and catching up on a personal level? And it works
Mm.
for us quite well because we just know what to expect, and we
Mhm.
know how much time we have. Anyway, we just know, we just set the expectations clear, so then there is no disappointment. But I
Yeah.
think for some people this is a connection killer. Essentially, what are you trying to do? You're trying to, turn a nice hangout catch up into like a structured workshop, or what are you doing here? So
And
I think
you
this is
think
question.
does it like you think it takes away the spontaneity or like freedom?
Yeah, for example, I think different people have different um, level, like different extent to which spontaneity supports connection for them.
Hmm.
That's kind of my theory, working theory for now. That, yeah, for some people, spontaneity is essentially this is the connection. I connect through being able to just flow with the conversation, and just respond to whatever arises. Versus some people don't feel that safe and comfortable doing that. Or maybe they do if they have known a person for a long time, but not if they are meeting a new person. Hence, the connection workshops, the authentic relating games help so many people to find connection, because then there is a structure and they know what will be happening, and when is their time to speak and when is their time to listen, and all of that. So I don't really
Hmm.
know if structure and agenda. I think sometimes it supports connection, sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of
Yeah,
hard to have a
I
clear
guess it
cut take
depends.
on that. Yeah. Well, I mean, other than that, there are like quite obvious things like being in a heavy emotional state. Probably doesn't support connection so much unless the other person is there to hold you and willing to listen, and that's what the connection is about. Maybe I feel like it's so hard to give just like one factor that
Hmm.
supports or disrupts connection, because I can almost always I can find the flip side to it.
Mm.
Um, yeah, yeah, that
Okay.
judgment, definitely judgment. I would say judgment doesn't support connection. You mentioned
Yeah.
also working with judgment, which signals to me that it has been quite an important topic for you, probably since you decided to address it with like installing a specific habit, respond to
Yeah.
it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
judgment. I don't think it supports connection. I don't think there's a flip side.
Yeah. I think yeah, so far the presence and judgment, those are like ones that yeah, like always is going to if you don't have it, it's going to hurt the connection. Cool. Going on to another topic. Yeah, I don't think we have too much time, so I'm gonna just pick. I had a few more questions, but I'll bring it down to just two more. One of the things you talked about in your emails that you're really interested as a topic right now, you said is how different relationships bring out different aspects of ourselves, and just how that relates to our own personal growth. Can you just expand on that and just where your mind was going with that?
Yeah, sure. So I think this exploration started when I was studying mindfulness and compassion, and there was this theory about emotional resilience or psychological resilience, and basically that we are more resilient when we have different ways to identify ourselves. So, for example, if we have someone who identifies with their work role more than anything, their
Hmm.
mental health will be much more fragile than someone who has like their identity spread into many different baskets. So, like a work
Hmm.
identity and a parent identity and identity
Hmm.
within a group of friends or in a community. Because then, if one identity basket gets threatened or there is something that we perceive as a failure, there's a difficulty, we have all these other identity aspects that we can fall back on. And so we don't lose our
Mm.
self-esteem, we don't lose direction in life so easily, we don't lose, a sense of self.
Interesting. Yeah, you
Yeah.
still like know who you are, like because you
Yeah,
didn't have
yeah,
just that one.
exactly. It's almost
Interesting.
like you can afford to have one aspect, a bit in the works, in the making, in some kind of a
Hmm.
transitional crisis, because you have a few others that will ground you and like, okay, I might have lost my job right now, but at least I am still a parent. I'm caring for my kids. This is where I will find more meaning right now, until I find another job and maybe make another career move. So I guess that as I started exploring relationship and connection work later on, that kind of kept coming back to me because I realized, first of all, living in a community where I live now, and also living between two different countries, I feel like I have quite a few different circles of people where I show up quite differently. And like sometimes I was even maybe not shocked, but like I couldn't get my head around it. Like how am I so like my sense of humor changes so much in Polish and in English, for example. It's almost like I'm such a different person. Or when I go and run the Authentic Connection group and everyone sees me as a facilitator and as that kind of the
Mm.
expert on communication, I have a very different way in which I show up versus when I go to a training and I'm with my mentors and I'm like, oh, I have so much to learn.
Mm.
And so I started realizing that being in those different roles is actually possible thanks to knowing a lot of different people and being in a lot of different settings. And part of it is even the proximity in which I know those people, kind of circling back to what we were saying before about like close friends, acquaintances, and how do you define them and how do you differentiate between them. But I feel that even that plays into the picture. Like people who know me very well, obviously they know a lot of my darker sides and vulnerabilities. So in that context, I am more inclined to explore that, to like show my shadow or like risk saying an uncomfortable thing. Um, and that sometimes might be at the cost of my self-confidence, but at least I'm exploring something new. I'm exploring my dark side versus people who know me from a distance, and especially in that kind of community facilitator role, for example, they can actually help me grow my confidence quite a bit. They definitely don't see the
Mm.
full picture of who I am, far from it. They see me at my best as I
Mm.
show up in the workshop, but they help me remember that I do have a lot of competency and I do have a lot to bring and I do have a lot to offer. So like from that perspective, it's quite nice to it's just very helpful to to grow as a person because you get to see yourself from all those different sides. I guess that's related to parts work that is also becoming like quite a big concept. Are you familiar with
Yeah.
parts work? That whole concept that we have multiple personalities living within ourselves. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so it's just that different people help to shine light on those different personalities and often also merge them together. Like
Mm.
that's another interesting place where, for example, you introduce your new partner to your group of friends, which is actually going to happen tomorrow for me. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Like, I've only spent time one on one with him, I have no
Yeah.
idea how we will show up in my group of friends.
Yeah. Very
But I
interesting.
already have a sense that it's going to be like two different sides of my personality
All right.
meeting. And I don't know how it will look, but I think there is a lot of learning in that and being able to observe that.
Really interesting.
Thanks
Just
for asking this.
yeah, I definitely noticed that in myself too. I have a relationship with someone, and then when I bring it to another person, it feels like those two. I've definitely always, whenever I do that, like introduce two people that in one context I knew into another. I'm a bit refining like how do I normally act? Like how should I act? Like do I act the way I do with this person or or this person? Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting how we do that, how it becomes like a natural thing for all of us
Yeah,
to do
right.
that.
And I think this confrontation is quite, sometimes it becomes clearer which side was I trying to show to this person or what was I hiding from that person. Because
Hmm.
suddenly, I don't know, I will make a joke like
Hmm.
that I would make with a friend, but I make it in front of my mom. And then I'm like, oh, I never really show that side of myself to my mom because it feels a bit strange or a bit awkward or a bit like I don't think she finds it funny. So it's just there
Yeah.
also becoming aware what parts are there.
Yeah, really interesting to keep in mind and just notice for myself. And I think anyone listening. I did have one more question, but actually, I should have asked that before. Are you okay with going a little bit over? We're about 5 minutes over right now.
Yeah, I think one more question is good. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, this last question is kind of a bit general, but loneliness is a huge problem. There's like varying statistics. Um, some say it's like as high as 60%, some are saying like 30%, but either way, it's a really, really high number. And I think we can both agree, we just know how bad it can hurt someone's life when they're feeling lonely. What do you see as potential problems to this, or yeah, potential solutions, I mean, to this really big problem?
To loneliness. Something about creating different levels of entry for people to get integrated back. Because, like, to me, essentially, I think about it from an angle of, or maybe two angles. One angle is the lonely people, whoever is lonely, is it because they don't have people around them? They're actually missing seeing other humans, like physically they're not seeing enough of other people, or is it that they have a lot of people around them, but the quality
Mm,
of connection isn't what they would want it to be? So I guess
mm,
these are two quite different scenarios to keep in mind. To think about the first one, I I think of those people as more vulnerable somehow, that don't have people around them, people who live in isolation, people who live on their own, don't have friends, don't have community. Maybe their family fell apart, maybe their partner died, whatever is the story kind of behind. I found that a lot of the time, that's something I learned working at another community center here, where we were organizing a lot of groups and a lot of activities for isolated people. A lot of the time we heard from social workers like, don't do groups for them. First step is just getting them out of the house. People are
mm,
sometimes really deep in their
right.
loneliness and it's really hard. And like coming to a group is like jumping 10 steps instead of doing one step
Mm,
at a time. So this is maybe not a specific solution, but just something to keep in mind, that like coming to an authentic relating group, for example, is great for some people for where they are at, but for some people it's just outside of their possibility, just yeah, way outside of that, what's possible for them. Yeah, I think there are in the UK there. I feel there is a lot of attempts, and like from the social kind of social care perspective of
mhm,
addressing loneliness and yeah, finding like one-on-one buddies for people with vulnerable people, sometimes people with learning difficulties, sometimes just people with mental health conditions, because different charities are focused on different um, maybe causes of that loneliness, or it's not even
mhm,
explicitly loneliness that they are addressing, but in between the lines that they are.
mhm,
Yeah, I mean, simple things, just like being aware of who's in your neighborhood. I guess this is something that we all could become a bit better at, especially those of us who live in cities, because this is definitely not part of culture at the moment to be like
yeah.
caring for your neighbor next door. It's not that obvious. I guess maybe for people from older generations it is, but I
Mhm,
noticed for myself as I'm talking about this right now, I don't actually know who lives on the other side of the fence. I'm so engrossed in my community here at the Salisbury Center that actually don't know my neighbors. And I guess that would be true for a lot of people. So just kind of having an awareness who is around that might use a chat, support, something. Yeah, and then I guess there's like the whole other side of the question with people who have a lot of friends or friends, a lot of people around them, but not necessarily the kind of relationships that they would want. And I don't know if this is a more straightforward question. In a way, maybe it is, because then it's more down to skills that you can learn to shift those relationships a little bit, because I think a lot of relationships are possible to be shifted if you have some skills. Yeah, which is like, I think we touched on that a little bit, like talking about events, talking about authentic relating. I guess these are the part of what you and I maybe are offering in terms of our workshops, our groups. Yeah, it's kind of the educational part of connection skills and learning. Yeah, I noticed I would want to like have a lot more good solutions, but I guess that's part of the exploration as well. And like you say, this is such a huge problem and multidimensional as well, because I think people are lonely for many different reasons. They have many different stories behind that loneliness. I'm sure most people weren't lonely all their lives, or at least they didn't feel it that way. So there's probably also like how they got there, what happened on the way, what positive experiences they have that they can refer back to, what worked for them in the past, and the whole systemic lens on that problem. Like, why are so many people lonely? Well, probably because we are not really living a natural lifestyle as a human race. In many parts of the world, we aren't anyway.
With just like phones and internet, all that.
Yeah, like raising kids in small families instead of sharing that childcare. Lots of things that, I guess this would be for another podcast episode, but like, probably just worth noting here that it's, again, not just an individual problem of like how do we solve it for ourselves, each one pulling themselves up by the bootstraps, but also just like the system that we have is not supporting people feeling connected.
And one thing I love that you said is, everyone is kind of having their own situation. So there should be different levels of entry. Like there isn't one solution that fits all. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Marta, I really love the conversations. If anyone wants to learn more about you, where can they find your work, or learn more about you? Or do you have any offerings that you have for people?
They can go to connectionhub.substack.com, or just type Connection Hub in Google. I think it would work. And that's my newsletter and blog, where I also give updates about my events, which are at the moment mostly in Edinburgh. There's an amazing thing coming up, which I am going to mention because it's a big thing. Sarah Ness and Joff from Authentic Revolution are coming to Edinburgh, or I guess to the UK, because I think people in the UK listening to this might want to travel for that event. So that's end of June, 28th until the 30th of June. If you sign up for my newsletter, you will learn about it 100%.
Cool. Is that like a retreat, or what is it?
It's a community leadership training. So for 2 days, we will have like an in-depth training. And the day before, we will have a community connection banquet. So we are inviting people. I guess the banquet will be mostly people from Edinburgh, but really it's open to everyone. It's going to be like a big dinner, up to 100 people, with Sarah and Geoff doing a little bit of a talk/workshop, kind of like an open workshop, so people at their tables can connect with each other, have nice food, have like a community. It's not really a networking event, but I hope some networking will happen kind of under the surface, and people from a city can connect in that way.
Sounds fun. Awesome. I'll leave that. I'll leave those links to your site on the show notes. And all right, Marta, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you guys so much for sticking with us till the end of this episode. If you liked the episode, please leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to. It makes a huge help for us. So please do that. We have some amazing people already lined up for the next several podcasts. So you definitely want to stay tuned for that. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.